Is there any way to sort out the enormous problem of the water companies in England and Wales? It's obviously a complex issue, which has its origins in the decision to privatise the water industry in 1989. But it's impossible to miss the extent to which it is constantly in the news. Raw sewage polluting our coastal waters, rivers, lakes, and even our precious chalk streams, like the River Misbourne, where John Milton wrote Paradise Lost, perhaps a more prophetic title than he knew. Not to mention the billions of litres of water being lost due to leaks in the water system. You have to ask yourself, is that fair? The good news is that there is a potential way to sort out this enormous problem using our approach known as the conflict cracker. With our 6-step approach, new avenues and resolutions emerge, which have the potential to create the change we all want. So let me explain how this could work. Step 1 in the conflict cracker is to identify the problem we want to resolve, and then the main stakeholders involved. Firstly, the problem. There is huge public anger, especially over the apparent arrogance and disregard by the companies of the extent of sewage contamination of our rivers and lakes. This, combined with shock over the level of debt the companies are carrying, it was zero at privatisation, but now stands at around £60 billion. And lastly, disquiet over the opaque ownership of many of the companies, their excess profits over many years and massive executive bonuses, despite poor performance. As far as stakeholders are concerned, we've identified 6 main ones, shown here. Step 2 is then to show what each group gets out of holding on to their current position, but we'll concentrate on the higher levels, the ones that really drive what they're doing, as these are the ones that will have to be met if a solution is to be sustainable over time. Namely, for the regulators, avoiding blame, protecting jobs, and appearing to be supportive. For the Labour government, an opportunity for them to introduce a policy that's likely to be very popular. For the water companies, their parent companies and senior people, contentment with the status quo. The public have no benefit from the current situation, and the Conservative opposition is likely to want to take a relatively low profile in order to concentrate on other things. Step 3 is then to go in the other direction and identify as many barriers, declared or hidden, which the stakeholders are putting up and which prevent any possible resolution. Faced with this many obstacles, the problem seems insurmountable. So we now want to move to step 4, identifying a so-called leverage point. This is the key thing which, if addressed successfully, would enable a breakthrough. There are 2 questions which will help us identify the leverage point. What is common to all these? Or what drives all these? If this analysis is reasonably accurate, it's obvious there's no incentive for the companies to change their behaviour as they're in control, making significant financial returns and suffering minimal penalties for their lack of long-term investment or the significant environmental damage they've caused. The regulators have been weak historically and can only enforce what the government enables them to. And even announcements from Ofwat that they're instructing water companies to pay back more than £157 million to customers will have little impact on the companies and little financial benefit to their millions of customers. And suggestions from activists that the public withhold payment of bills hasn't had much traction to date. The obvious decision would be to nationalise the industry, but any decision to do so could become very protracted and expensive to implement. Therefore, we do not consider this to be a viable option. On the positive side, the new government would recognise that solving the problem of the water companies would be extremely popular with the public. The leverage point would therefore seem to be the locus of control, somehow shifting the power from the water companies to the central government, with a regulator that does what it's supposed to do. In the longer term, this should also help to force a new culture in the industry. And now to a possible solution. Step 5. The government can show decisiveness and strengthen environmental credibility by introducing legislation that would gain significant credibility with the public because of its undoubted popularity. This legislation could be framed around 3 things. Making social and environmental accountability a core requirement of water businesses, with enhanced monitoring processes and severe penalties for sewage discharges. Establishing a mechanism whereby water company executives would be liable for personal financial penalties or even incarceration for their organisation's failure. Including a requirement for increased transparency of ownership. These measures would also require the existing regulatory bodies to be replaced or strengthened significantly. The 6th and final step is to test the delivery of that new goal against the higher level interests of the parties identified earlier. In other words, would it meet all the needs that have been driving their actions? Regulators would be unlikely to resist, as they would need to be strengthened to ensure enforceability and sustainability of the initiative. Government is likely to be keen as it provides proof of taking positive action on a topic of major public concern. Water companies would definitely resist and are never going to embrace the change willingly, but they would be unable to stop it if the legislation is skillfully worded, and this downside would be outweighed by the significant political, social and environmental benefits experienced by everybody else. The public would welcome the intervention, and the opposition are unlikely to make a fuss because of their inaction historically and probable internal focus following the general election result. At the time of recording, the government has been making positive noises about tightening legislation around the water companies, along the lines described in our analysis. But will that go far enough? Let's hope they are courageous, because decisive action could not only resolve this problem, but also set the standard for addressing further examples of corporate and organisational arrogance and abuse, something so many of us want to see. And we believe that together we can make a difference. Thank you for watching.